All right, so you know how it is. You're bombarded with news every single day,
Yeah.
right? It's like trying to drink from a fire hose.
Totally. Yeah, it's impossible to keep up with absolutely everything.
But at the same time, you want to be informed, you know? Like, you don't want to just skim the surface. You want to actually understand what's happening in the world.
You want to cut through all that noise and find the signal.
Exactly. So that's where we come in. Today, we're taking a deep dive into a specific and I think really fascinating situation, how coffee exports from Ethiopia specifically are being impacted by some recent, well, adjustments to American tariffs.
Yeah, and Ethiopia isn't just any coffee producer, right? It's like the birthplace of coffee.
Right, exactly. And that's what makes it so interesting, like how these tariff changes could potentially reshape things for, well, a country that has such a deep-rooted connection to this product.
Absolutely, and we've gone deep into some really informative material, like really trying to understand both sides of this coin.
Yeah.
On the one hand, you've got this incredibly rich history and tradition of coffee in Ethiopia. And on the other hand, you have these new U.S. policies that are starting to, well, shift the global economic landscape for them. It's not just about the beans.
So I think what we want to do today is kind of guide you through all of that, break it down and see how Ethiopia is navigating these changes and maybe even more importantly, what kinds of opportunities might actually come out of all of this.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's easy to just see tariffs and think, oh, that's bad,
Yeah.
right? But there's always more to the story.
Right. There's always nuance.
Yeah.
So before we jump into the tariffs themselves, let's talk about Ethiopia and coffee. I mean, it's obviously more than just like an industry there.
Bro,
I mean,
absolutely. It's like deeply ingrained in their culture and economy. It's not just a commodity. It's part of their national identity.
And the variety of coffee that comes from Ethiopia is just, it's mind-boggling to me. I mean, you have all these different regions, different growing conditions, and each one produces these unique flavors.
It's amazing, isn't it? Like, you think of terroir with wine, right?
Yeah.
How the specific place where the grapes are grown affects the flavor. Well, it's the same with coffee in Ethiopia.
Oh, yeah. I've definitely heard people talk about Ethiopian coffee. Like that, like it has this sense of place. And it's mostly smallholder farmers and cooperatives who are responsible for this quality and these traditions, right?
That's a really important point. You don't see huge corporate-owned farms dominating the landscape there. It's very much a network of these smaller producers who've been doing things the same way for generations.
It's like they're the keepers of the coffee flame, so to speak. But at the same time, I mean, it sounds like there have also been some pretty significant advancements in recent years, like efforts to modernize and improve things.
Yeah, definitely. There's been a real push to invest in things like infrastructure, better roads and transportation systems to get the coffee out to the world.
Makes sense.
And then also adopting new processing techniques, like better ways of sorting and drying the beans, and even providing more training and resources to the farmers themselves. It's not about abandoning tradition, but about like building on it and
Right.
and improving the overall quality and efficiency.
So it's like a blend of the old and the new.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's working. I mean, the demand for Ethiopian coffee internationally is growing, and they're rising to meet that challenge.
So we've got this picture of Ethiopia, right, with this incredibly rich coffee heritage, this commitment to quality, and they're actively evolving and adapting. But now let's throw a wrench in the gears. Let's talk about these new American tariffs.
Okay, yeah. Tariffs. So it's easy to think of them as like purely negative, right? Like some kind of economic
A
punishment.
barrier, yeah.
Right. But it's interesting because the research we looked at, it suggests that in this particular case, it might not be so straightforward.
Okay, how so?
Well, because these tariffs aren't just aimed at Ethiopia, they're affecting other coffee-producing countries as well. And remember, the U.S. is a huge coffee market. So any changes they make, they have ripple effects throughout the whole global supply chain.
So you're saying these tariffs could actually create opportunities for Ethiopian exporters?
Potentially, yeah.
Yeah.
Because if coffee from other countries becomes more expensive because of these tariffs, then, well, Ethiopian coffee starts to look more attractive, especially when you consider its reputation for quality and that unique flavor profile we were talking about earlier.
Oh, I see. So it's like if your usual coffee suddenly gets a price hike, you might be more willing to try something new, something maybe a bit more, well, special.
Exactly. And that's where this idea of competitive positioning comes in. Ethiopian coffee can really emphasize its heritage, its quality, the fact that it's often organic, and position itself as like the premium alternative.
So it's not just about competing on price, it's about competing on value.
Right, and that's something that, Ethiopian coffee is really well suited to do.
And the sources we looked at, they also talked about this idea of market diversification.
Yeah, yeah. So basically, these tariffs are, well, they're kind of forcing American importers to look for new sources of coffee.
They can't just rely on the same old supply chains anymore.
Right. And Ethiopian exporters, they're in a good position to take advantage of this. They can ramp up their outreach efforts, you know, really get out there and connect with those American importers who are now actively looking for new partners.
Makes sense. It's all about being proactive and seizing the moment.
Yeah, and direct trade is a big part of this too,
Hmm.
cutting out the middleman and establishing those one-on-one relationships.
So instead of just selling coffee through like big commodity markets, they're going directly to the roasters and the cafes.
Exactly, and that gives them more control over pricing, and it also allows them to really tell their story.
Which brings us to the next point, this idea of enhanced branding and storytelling. Because, I mean, let's be honest, people care about where their coffee comes from now more than ever.
Oh, totally. It's not just about the caffeine kick anymore.
Hmm.
People want to know the story behind the product, like who grew it, how it was grown, what makes it special. And Ethiopian coffee has a great story to tell.
It does. It's like a story of tradition and craftsmanship and a connection to the land.
Yeah, and that story resonates with people, especially in a market where everyone is trying to stand out.
Yeah.
It has value.
So how are they actually doing this? Like, how are they getting that story out there?
Well, they're investing in marketing, creating compelling narratives that highlight the journey of the coffee from the farm to the cup. They're emphasizing the role of those smallholder farmers, the unique terroir, the traditional methods, and all of that helps to justify a higher price point, especially when compared to, those mass-produced coffees that might now be more expensive because of the tariffs.
So it's not just about slapping a label on a bag of beans. It's about creating an experience.
Exactly. It's about telling a story that people want to be a part of.
Okay, so we've talked about how these tariffs could actually create some unexpected advantages for Ethiopian coffee exporters. But it sounds like they're not just sitting back and hoping for the best, right? They're actively coming up with strategies to make the most of this situation.
Yeah, definitely. The sources we looked at, they outlined a few key strategies that Ethiopia is using to really bolster its export capabilities. And the first one is all about strengthening trade alliances.
Okay, so what does that mean in practice?
Well, it's about forming partnerships with established international buyers and distributors.
So finding people who already have those networks and that expertise in place.
Exactly, because those partnerships can help to streamline the process of getting the coffee to market. They can help to overcome any logistical hurdles, any extra costs or complications that might arise from the tariffs.
It's like finding allies who can help you navigate this new terrain.
Yeah, exactly. And then another key strategy is investing in quality assurance.
Okay, so what does that involve?
Well, it's about getting those certifications, like organic and fair trade.
Right, because those are like badges of honor.
Right.
Right. They tell the consumer that this coffee meets certain standards.
Exactly. And not only do those certifications help to meet the regulations of importing countries, but they also, well, they appeal to a certain segment of consumers who are looking for those ethical and sustainable products.
And those consumers are often willing to pay a premium for those products, right?
Exactly. So it's a win-win. It helps Ethiopian coffee stand out in the market, and it supports those ethical practices.
Okay, so we've got trade alliances and quality assurance. And then the sources also talk about embracing technological innovation, which, when you think about coffee, it's not the first thing that comes to mind.
I know, right? It seems like a very traditional industry.
Yeah, but technology is playing an increasingly important role.
Oh, absolutely. And it's helping to really maintain that premium status of Ethiopian coffee. Like, for example, they're using digital traceability systems now.
Okay, so what does that mean?
Well, it means that consumers can actually trace their coffee back to its origin, like the specific farm where it was grown.
Oh, that's cool. Like you can scan a code or something and see the whole journey.
Yeah, exactly. And that level of transparency, it builds trust. It shows that you have nothing to hide.
Oh, where?
And they're also using automated quality testing.
So making sure that every batch of coffee meets those high standards.
Exactly. And all this helps to streamline the supply chain. It makes things more efficient, and it reinforces that image of Ethiopian coffee as a high quality premium product.
So they're not afraid to embrace new technologies and use them to their advantage.
Definitely. And then the last strategy they talked about was expanding market research and intelligence.
Okay, so what does that mean for coffee?
Well, it means really understanding the global market. Like what are the trends? What are consumers looking for? What are those niche markets where Ethiopian coffee can really shine?
So it's about being strategic and targeting those specific consumers who are most likely to appreciate like the unique qualities of Ethiopian coffee.
Exactly. And by doing that, they can potentially overcome any price sensitivities that might be caused by the tariffs. Because if people really want your product, they'll be willing to pay a little bit more.
It's about creating that demand and making sure you're reaching the right people.
Right. So, yeah, all of these strategies, they really show that Ethiopia is taking a proactive approach. They're not just reacting to these tariffs. They're using them as an opportunity to really think strategically about their place in the global market.
So as we look ahead, it sounds like the story of Ethiopian coffee exports isn't necessarily one of doom and gloom, right? It's more complex than that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, change is always challenging, right?
Yeah.
But Ethiopia seems to be well positioned to not only adapt to these new circumstances, but to actually thrive.
And they have some pretty powerful assets, right? Like that deep-rooted heritage, the quality of their coffee, and this commitment to sustainability and ethical practices.
Exactly. Those are things that consumers value, and they're becoming more and more important in today's market.
So it's like these tariffs might actually be pushing Ethiopian coffee to like really lean into its strengths and showcase what makes it so special.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to put it. It's like instead of seeing it as a barrier, they're seeing it as an opportunity to really define themselves and stand out from the crowd.
And it's working. They're expanding their global reach, they're strengthening their trade relationships, and they're doing it all while ensuring that, well, coffee lovers all over the world can continue to enjoy those amazing, unique Ethiopian flavors.
Exactly. And it's not just about the economics. It's about preserving those traditions, supporting those smallholder farmers, and really celebrating the cultural significance of coffee in Ethiopia.
It's a pretty inspiring story when you think about it.
It is.
So just to kind of bring it all together, I think what we've seen today is that Ethiopia's coffee industry, with its rich history and proactive strategies, is really finding a way to navigate these new U.S. tariffs, not as a roadblock, but as a chance to really broaden its global reach. They're
Hmm.
leveraging their heritage, the quality of their coffee, and they're thinking ahead. They're being strategic about their place in the market.
Yeah. I think that's a really great summary.
And it makes me wonder, like, given how interconnected everything is in the global economy and how consumer preferences are always changing, what other industries might we see these kinds of unexpected opportunities emerge for? It really makes you think beyond just the immediate headlines. Like what are those ripple effects that we might not be seeing right now, but that could lead to some really interesting developments down the line?
That's a great question, and I think it's something worth pondering, because there's always more to the story than meets the eye.
There always is.
Always.